Hello, hello. Welcome to Coffee with Tina. I am Tina Swithin. I am the author of Divorcing a Narcissist, which I'm actually reviewing right now for some. I'm doing a 1.25-hour speech, keynote speech for a bar association in Kentucky. So I'm like going back and reviewing things to make sure all my talking points are set. I am the founder of One Mom's Battle and the CEO of the High Conflict Divorce Coach Certification Program. With all of that said, I am not an attorney. I'm not qualified to give you legal advice. We are a community of survivors who come together and talk about divorcing a narcissist or child custody issues when a narcissist is involved, but always consult with your own attorney on any of these matters. I do want to do a quick shout out. InTheirBestInterest.com, we are collecting names. And if you have a family court professional who is not acting in the best interest of your child, we want to hear about it. This will not be shared anywhere publicly unless, of course, you gave us permission, and then we would still protect your identity. But we have collected almost 5,000 names so far, and we are seeing the fruits of our labor, or of your labor, in bringing this to our attention, because we're starting to connect people. So if one particular family court professional hits our radar 5 different times, and all of the stories sound very similar, and then we know there's something going on, whether it's collusion, corruption, whatever, we are then going to each of you and saying, do we have your permission to connect you with these 4 other people? And this is where change happens, because whether it's filing a complaint with a bar association or another professional entity, or what we are seeing right now, media blowing the covers on all of these corrupt, rotten players. So, and a lot of the journalists who are doing these investigative pieces will talk to you and protect your identity. So as they build their stories, it allows us to pull from that. And the other way that database could become helpful is, let's say a researcher is doing important research on domestic violence, on post-separation abuse, whatever it is, we want to be able to connect you with them. So please, please, please take a few minutes, set an hour aside, tell us everything about every professional who has been involved in your case. Again, that is InTheirBestInterest.com. So, what is today's question? Let me get to it here. Today's question is, how do you reassure your children that you support them and love them despite a narcissist's effort to ruin your image to the children? So I'm not going to discount the reality of a toxic human trying to turn the children against the healthy parent. It is an exhausting battle, and some of the most heartbreaking stories I hear do fall into this category. I'm going to share my own personal experience and perspective, which, like so many other things that we talk about, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And after, I will share some advice from the battlefield, which is what I like to call it. These are comments that I have pulled from our various social media channels when we open these things up for discussion. And so for those of you who may be new to OMB, One Mom's Battle, my battle began in 2009. My daughters were just around the age of 2 and 4. When we unofficially separated without court orders in place, the girls were only 1 and 3, so they were just babies. And my ex-husband tried very hard to turn my daughters against me, calling me names. Those who have read my book, you know about my nickname, T-Rex. Um, According to him, I was the reason why they could not have any fun. I was the reason why they couldn't spend more time with him. Mom's house had all these rules. Dad's house was so fun. It was a lot. And when you're already feeling so beaten down, um, it's a lot. And I remember him putting my daughter on the phone at a birthday party and asking if they could stay later. He told them that if they did have to leave, they would not get cake. And he had already asked me prior to the birthday party if he could extend his time, which at that point was only daytime visits because I had successfully chipped away at his overnights. And based on where we were in our custody battle, I knew the importance of sticking to the court order. And not to mention, his family members were not safe or healthy for my daughters to be around. And he was at a family birthday party. So I was counting down the minutes until they were back in my care. But the point is, it was an ongoing attempt to make me look like the bad guy, to cause a disconnect between my daughters and I. And even though he knew in advance that I was not willing to budge, he placed my daughter directly in the line of fire in an effort to hurt me. It's really devastating to be working overtime to shelter your children from the reality of these situations, yet the other parent is weaponizing them and placing them directly in the middle. So yes, apparently they were not going to get to eat birthday cake because they had to leave early. So while I was on my way to go pick them up from our exchange, I bought cake at one of those, grocery store pre-made cake sections to buffer the disappointment. There were a couple, I didn't always do things like that, but there were times where I didn't have the energy. I didn't know what condition they were coming back in, if they were going to be devastated, crying, upset. And I just wanted to make the entire issue a moot point. Thankfully, they came back and they were fine, despite his attempts to get them upset over this birthday cake issue. My daughters were really young, and it was an incredible amount of counter parenting. So, another example, I had a lot of energy around what my daughters ate. We did not do fast food. We did organic whenever we could. There was really no sugar, and much of this was due to my own health struggles and autoimmune disorder. I wanted to create a solid base for them nutritionally. But because he knew this was a button for me, he went overboard trying to entice them with sweets, with anything I didn't want them to have. He provided. He and his mom both made sure they came home with toys from McDonald's just to show me where they had been. It's all those little nudges and pokes. I always use the phrases like being pecked to death by a duck. A really aggressive, rabid one. But, sometimes it feels like we're dealing with a 5-year-old, but an incredibly unstable 5-year-old, just the tactics that they will employ to hurt us. But straight out of the playbook, we had both been very aligned on this topic during our relationship, but he knew it was a way to push my buttons. And we see this a lot, whether it's vaccinations, extracurricular activities, homeschooling, regardless of whether you were in agreement on these topics during your relationship, I can almost guarantee you that the narcissist will take an opposing side just because they know you're going to have energy about whatever the topic is. They don't truly care about the children, and they only see them as pawns and weapons. It has nothing to do with the vaccinations or the sports or the homeschooling or the organic food. It's about hurting you. And it's sick that they will use innocent, vulnerable children to do that, but they do. And in my situation and in many of yours, it was actually more sadistic than that. Um, I remember when we first separated and we were doing a nesting agreement, which shows how naive I was. Um, I went into that separation nesting agreement with the same rose colored glasses I wore when I started my relationship with him. And back then, we were not talking about these issues. So I truly did not understand what I was up against. But so we're doing this nesting agreement where we basically shared a house. He lived in San Francisco Bay Area. I lived in San Luis Obispo. We kept the home, and all I cared about was giving my daughters stability and letting them sleep in their own beds every night. So here I am out there couch surfing on the weekends as a 34-year-old woman. I stayed with my accountant one weekend, with a high school friend another weekend, just so he could come into the home and stay there. And he would leave on Sundays to drive back. And one particular evening, he went in to say goodbye to the girls before he left. And he came out, and it had been pretty benign and uneventful. And I thought it was odd that he went back into the bedroom after he had already said goodbye, and I could hear him talking to our youngest daughter, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. So I moved closer, and what I could hear was, aren't you going to miss Daddy? I'm going to be so far away. Daddy is going to be so sad. I'm sad all the time. I'm going to miss you girls so much, and on and on. And my youngest daughter started to cry under his relentless manipulations. So then he walks out of the room, and I go in to soothe her. And after I get her calmed down and tucked in, I leave. And the next thing I know, he goes back into the room. And at this point, I'm really upset, not understanding what he's trying to accomplish, because I would have never imagined what he was actually doing. So he goes in there, he pours it on even thicker. He gets her so worked up that she is now hysterical. And I go in and I try to put a stop to it, and I ask him to leave. And at this point, I realize that he has a video camera set up and pointed at her bed. I just talked about this on Instagram Live, and last night, reflecting on this story and even just talking about it an hour ago, it makes me physically ill to reflect on this. And it was in that moment that I realized how truly sick he was. And that really kicked off another series of events that his mask was off, and I was forced to face who he was, and we ended up in the women's shelter shortly after that. But it was around that time that my Aunt Bev, who was my rock and my voice of reason, told me that, not related to that specific incident, but just in general, that I was giving him too much of my energy, that there was a reality that was horrible, and that I did have a lot to counter, but there was also a reality to how much control I had over the situation. I had no control over what he was doing, but I did have control over how I showed up and who I was as a mother. My aunt and I were very similar, very optimistic, but also incredibly realistic. And my aunt was able to see the bigger picture when I was so caught up in the emotions of all of it. And that is normal. If you didn't have emotions surrounding this topic, I would ask to check your pulse, because nature intended for us to protect our young, our kids, but our hands are tied by this patriarchal, barbaric, corrupt system of family court. So I decided very early on that I would stand in my authentic truth as a mother. that I would compartmentalize how much energy I gave him, and that I would pour every ounce of my energy into empowering my children and teaching them what healthy looked like. Um, and there's an important thing that we all have to remember. That bond and the connection that we have with our children is pure and authentic. That will stand the test of time, even with the roller coasters that we are placed on, even during the times when we feel like we are losing this battle, or that the bond with our children is being, severed or compromised. That bond that we created with them is their baseline and their foundation. Unlike what's happening on the other side, for us, it's not a false narrative created for litigation purposes. It's not an act to get photos for social media. It's not a performance that we turn on when people are watching. That is what the other side is doing. So, even if our children cannot articulate it, that bond that we have created with them is powerful and sustainable. And I want to pause and recognize, I do know that many of you, sorry, my phone was ringing. I do know that many of you are feeling incredible pain, because it does feel like the narcissist has successfully turned the children away from you. And I see and hear these stories so often. And when I get these emails, I can feel the pain in the words, and it's gutting. And it breaks my heart for all of you. And I wish I had a magic wand. I wish I had all of the answers. With that said, I do have a unique vantage point of seeing these things play out over time. And I will say that that authentic bond you created is what they fall back on. When left to their own, when they do see behind the mask, they come back. And that we could talk about this for hours, and we should, because this is an important topic as well. But coming back to center and to the topic, when we are giving the narcissist our energy in terms of worrying about what they are doing, trying to counter what they are doing, it depletes us of our natural instincts and abilities as healthy parents. We have to pour ourselves into our children. But also, equally important, we also have to keep our own oxygen mask on as tight as possible. It became the most important job I have ever had, to think of it as creating their foundation to be unshakable. There were lots of things I did, but these things, because I did them because I believe it's imperative in today's society. Regardless of who their other parent is, or if their parent is narcissistic or toxic or unhealthy or whatever labels we give them. There are lots of these people out in the world. So I made this, my mission in this subject area about strengthening them in general terms, because I didn't want to keep giving him my power. I wanted my daughters to be strong regardless of what toxic person entered their safety zone. So some of the things I did, we went online and downloaded a bunch of different affirmations, and we pasted them on little cards. And every day we would choose one, and that would be our mantra for the day. It would open lines of communication on that topic. I've shared before, and I'm going to share again today. My daughters have gone on to create their own affirmation cards. And based on some of the things that we used to do and talk about, and you can get these. This one says, I trust my intuition. This one says, I always try my best. The lighting's messing it up. And there, there's one that says, I am intelligent. There's one that says, my feelings matter. I recognize red flags. You can get these at pinkfireworks.com. They have a whole bunch of resources that they're creating for children who follow in their footsteps. And my daughters are coming up on their 16th and 18th birthdays now, which is just, I can't even wrap my mind around this. But, I will tell you, all of these things I did when they were little have paid off. I have two amazing humans on my hands, and I'm just so proud of them. So whether you use their cards or make your own like we used to do, those are powerful and they can go a long ways. My house was considered empathy boot camp. We lived it, we breathed it, we modeled it. I modeled it wherever I could. And it was so important for me to counter the reality of our society, but also genetic predisposition that could potentially come from a narcissistic parent. And I probably went to extremes at times, but it was my goal to get them out of their own heads and into the shoes of others. If we saw somebody who was disabled, how do you think it feels to be in their position, and really making them in tune with other people's struggles. Homeless, we used to unhoused, we used to carry, we'd make care packages, put them in the trunk of our car and carry them so that, whenever we saw a person who was unhoused, we would go find them and give them care packages. And so opening their eyes to it's not just about me, it's about other people as well. But equally important is understanding boundaries, because we don't want to create these little beings that are so empathetic that they are repeating cycles like we did. We want to teach them about boundaries and red flags and all the things we did not learn, because let's get real, we were not talking about these things 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago. We have an incredible advantage today that we do have tools and information and resources to help us create that solid foundation for our children. And I really feel the need to underscore this, to really highlight it. We are not teaching them about boundaries or red flags when it comes to the other parent. These are two separate things. That is a big no-no in the family court system. This is about teaching them this terminology in general, so they can have boundaries with someone at school, or maybe they recognize a character on a television show who has red flags. Boundaries and red flags became part of our everyday language, but never directed at the other parent. I will tell you, when they connect those dots on their own, when it comes to the other parent, much more powerful than anything we could ever say. But I never condone speaking poorly about the other parent in any capacity. And then for our kids, knowing their truth at such a core level that it repels attempts at gaslighting. And many of you have talked about the game that I created when they were little, and I would always let them know that we were going to play that game. I never sprung it on them. And that game was called I Know My Truth. So as we were driving, I would say, let's play the I Know My Truth game. And I would look and I would say, the sky is orange. And they would repeat back, I know my truth. The sky is gray or blue or whatever color they saw. I would say, hey, look, my shirt is purple. And they would say, I know my truth. Your shirt is orange or brown or whatever. Because it's an important lesson. And obviously it needs to be tweaked to be age appropriate for your kids. But we want to start instilling in them that when somebody, attempts to gaslight them, although we don't want to use those words, they have to know their truth at such a core level. And, it's a red flag when someone says something but does something else. That's another important lesson. Words and actions should always be in alignment, and through talking about it, but also through me modeling it and then giving it words. So those are some other important things. Love and Logic Parenting was an incredibly powerful tool for me, and it's based on empathy, but also consequences. And you can look this up. They have YouTube videos, they have courses you can take. In my opinion, when we are dealing with a narcissist who lacks empathy and feels above consequences, this is a parenting style that can just naturally counter so much of that. This parenting style recognizes that for children, so many things feel out of their control. That's compounded even more when you're in one of these situations. But even for children living a normal, healthy life, they don't have a lot of control and they don't have a voice in a lot of things. So for that reason, lots of things tend to become a battle unnecessarily. And I shared on Instagram Live, I remember going to a Love and Logic course and raising my hand and saying, every night is a battle with my 2-year-old because she doesn't want to put on pajamas. And I remember the instructor saying, do you give her a choice? Tonight, why don't you just say, do you want the pink ones or the blue ones? And I thought, that's really silly and way too basic. It worked. Never had another fight about pajamas again, just by giving her a choice. So just parenting in general, it's been so wonderful. And it's little things, even with toddlers. Do you want the red cup, the blue cup? Do you want do you want to eat breakfast now or in 5 minutes? Do you want to go to the park or the zoo? So many choices that did not affect my life. And so they felt they had control. And then when they make mistakes, it's leading with empathy and then following with consequences. And a lot of this deviates from the actual question. I know that, but it is very important for us in regards to this topic to create that foundation for our children that is so strong and rock solid and still enforced because they have challenges that most children do not. So when I'm reflecting back on the question, how do you reassure your children that you support them and love them despite a narcissist's efforts to ruin your image to the children? So what I've done here, I completely cut the narcissist out of that question, out of that equation, because I'm just not going to give them my power. So for me, this question becomes, how do you reassure your children that you support them and you love them? This is where it's at. And this comes naturally to us before we allowed the water to get muddy by the narcissist. It's all of the things we've talked about here. Our children know we support them and that we love them because they can feel it, even if they cannot articulate it. We show up, we do what comes naturally to us. We shut out all of that other toxicity that is trying to enter. And then, before we close, I have 2 comments that I pulled from the battlefield. Alicia Justine shares, recently my daughter has shared more of the things he said about me. I've told her 2 things. First, I say, oh wow, does that sound like the me you know? And then I tell her I'm sorry she's heard things that make her doubt me. And then in general terms, to watch people's actions versus words, which piggybacks on what we talked about today. So thank you to Alicia Justine for sharing that. And then Brooke Linville shares an experience with her son. She says, my son, maybe 6 or 7 at the time, came home and told my mother, who was visiting, that I was a manipulator. I asked him what that word meant, and he said he did not know. So we looked up the word together, and then I told him I was a manipulator, that I manipulated objects like pencils and other things every single day. He was so relieved in that moment not to have to pick between his parents and decide who was wrong. He's brought it up for a couple of years now, and he's older and knows what was meant at the time. He and I have a great relationship now, but what that experience taught me was if there is a way to make us both right and to make our kids not have to choose, or even to help them understand the words, it will relieve the pressure that our kids are under. And that is just beautiful. Before I close, I do want to say I get a lot of requests questioning if I have one-on-one coaching. I do, however, I'm not taking new clients, but I have trained an incredible group of high conflict divorce coaches, because they're it is an integral part of your team to have someone who can get in the trenches with you, look at the variables of your situation, and help you to navigate these things, because it's challenging. My heart really goes out to all of you. I know what it feels like. I have been doing this work for 13 years and I watch other people go through this. And so to have a strategy partner help you look at your specific situation and figure out a game plan can be so helpful. You can go to onemomsbattle.com and then click on divorce coaches. And through this 8-week training program that they go through, I download every bit of information from my brain on all of these topics and give this to them in a wonderful little toolbox. And then we also have amazing instructors in the program, Dr. Ramani, Dr. Christine Danbeck, Dr. Catherine Barrett, Mr. Jeff Diamond, an attorney in Texas. We just have a wonderful group of instructors. So they come with my stamp of approval. Again, you can go to onemomsbattle.com and click divorce coaches, or go over to our official website. It's called HC for High Conflict, divorcecoach.com, and you can just find a divorce coach over there. All right, everyone, take care. We'll see you next week.